Hi, it's Alistair McIntyre for Electric Scotland. I've been moved to do this video because of the discussions on the terrorism attacks in London. Especially because today the Scottish Review, a lot of the regular SR writers have got together to put their views on terrorism, why it's happening and how we might start to look for solutions. I'll put a link to that article actually underneath so you can click on it and have a read yourself and see what you think. But it struck me that the one item that was missed was education. I'm kind of coming to the view that our education, I mean, I'm talking from a Scottish perspective, you have to bear in mind, but on the whole, Scottish education has been going downhill since we got devolution. And there's been a couple of very good articles recently from the Chokka Blog people about the decline in Scotland's education system. And what we're seeing is we don't have enough teachers, and we're not training them well enough either. So that seems to be the core problem that we have on education in Scotland. But bearing in mind that it's many years since I was at school, so I don't really know how the education system or the curriculum is being built these days and what's being taught in school and what isn't being taught in school. But I'm becoming more and more concerned that we're not using the education system well enough to bring up kids in today's world and equipping them for the future. When I say that, I mean things like literature, reading, writing, maths and science are clearly core areas. And Scotland's not doing well on any of those. And when I look at Singapore's number one for all three, and it would seem to me that they've got challenges that we don't have in Scotland. Like in Singapore, they have multiple languages there and multiple ethnic groups there, but somehow they brought them all together, and their education system is superb. But while these three core, like literature, maths and science, are core to education, we clearly need lots of teachers and better trained teachers. Because that's the other problem we have in Scotland, is that we don't have enough teachers, and that was the decision that was made, albeit perhaps they got bum information and they made decisions based on that bum information. And so I'm giving the SNP some excuses here. But the thing is, we have to always do the best we can with the information that's available. And if we don't have the information available, we need to get that information. And through factual information, we can make better decisions. So certainly in Scotland, we have an issue on education. And it's since devolution, so it's not just the SNP, it's obviously Labour and the Lib Dems have been part of all of this. Because bearing in mind that education in Scotland is a devolved matter. And through the block grant, the Barnett formula, we have sufficient money sent to Scotland that would keep Scotland in line with the rest of the UK. But if you look at the latest information, like Chokka Blog, for example, had just put out another new blog today in which it's showing that Scotland for the last number of years has spent much less than the rest of the UK on education. And only this last year, 2016, did they actually match the figures for educational spending that they have in the rest of the UK. But for many years we were well below the spend. Now that was a choice that was made by the SNP, so that was obviously clearly wrong. They made a mistake there. But the question is, how do we correct the problem? Now, the core is literature, maths and science, reading and writing. And Scotland used to be the best in the world by far in all of these areas. Now we're just average and steadily going downhill. And the SNP have taken to actually hiding figures from us because it's bad reading all the time at the moment. And that's not good enough because you need factual information so that you can assess whether you're improving or going back the way. And if we don't have factual information, we can't make the proper decisions. So whether it's bad, the results of the analysis are poor for Scotland, that doesn't actually matter. It only matters from the point of view that it's telling us we have a problem that needs to be fixed. And then we have to figure out how to fix it. I mean, for example, Singapore is now the #1 in literature, maths and science. And yet they have different languages that are spoken in Singapore and different ethnic groups. So they're far more challenged than Scotland is, where we have really just one language. But in Singapore, they only recruit teachers from the top 5% of graduates. And they put them in a central training school. And they say when the training teachers come out of that school and they've passed, that they're ready to be immediately effective in the classroom. Now that strikes me that they've got it right, whereas in Scotland we haven't. So we need to learn from things like that and change the way we do things. But also my problem is that it's many years ago when I was at school. And so I don't actually know what they do teach in school today or how they go about it. But it seems to me we need a social, cultural and history section within our schools where we've got to talk about the religions of the world so that we understand. I mean, we need to understand more about the Muslims, but the Muslims also need to understand more about the Christians. And so if we had a really good religious conversation going on in all the schools, we would perhaps learn to be far more tolerant of each other. And it's like, we've got obesity problems in Scotland. So people don't know what to eat or how to cook a decent meal that's nutritious and stuff like that. These things should be taught at school. And then we've got the whole social media scene where so many people seem to say because they can say something, they can just say it. They don't care. In fact, I don't think it's not caring. I think it's just they don't understand that what they're saying can actually hurt people and upset people. They don't seem to realise that by saying that, it's hurting other people. And then what I'm seeing more and more of is someone's putting a case out for something, and instead of addressing the case and the points that are being raised, they just trash the individual. That's rude in the extreme. So children aren't being brought up with any manners. And that's something that parents should be teaching them. Good manners. But unfortunately, education is having to take the role of parenting. Because too many parents don't have time to talk to their kids. Both husband and wife are working. And when they get back, they've got a whole ton of stuff to do, like go shopping and all this kind of stuff. And so they don't really talk to their kids. They don't have family doesn't get together for meals. So there's no conversation going over. They all say, well, we need the money so we can have a lovely place to live and we can have the money to buy what we need and stuff like that. But mentally, you're starving your kids because you're not talking to them. You're not having discussions. You're not explaining things to them. And we all know as kids, because we've all grown up, we know our parents did talk a lot of common sense to us, but we didn't believe them because we're kids. We think we know better. And it's only later in life you realise that actually what your parents said was actually quite intelligent and you should have listened to them. But we had to experience it for ourselves. And that's probably as it should be. The trouble is we keep making the same mistakes. So I think in education terms, we need to include like how to cook a basic meal and talk about basic nutrition. Not go overboard on it, but at least get the basics established. Talk about how to deal with social media, that if you put up a nude photo of yourself, that's going to hit you years down the road. And then, and when you're talking to people online, that you respect their point of view. You can make your point of view, and you can make it strongly. But if you're going to then turn that into trashing an individual, that just brings you right down to their level. I mean, it's ridiculous. And as I say, if you'd learned anything about history, you'll see that the great religions of the world have been at war with each other and have caused millions of deaths over the centuries. Millions of deaths. I mean, that's why Great Britain became Great Britain, because on the whole, we were Presbyterian in our outlook, whereas most of Europe was Catholic. And so it was almost a defensive mechanism for Britain and Scotland to come together. England and Scotland came together to form Britain. And so that made a lot of sense. But again, if you look at the histories, I mean, the way the Catholics worked in France was horrendous, because if you didn't believe in religion, Christian religion, you could be put to death. And of course, if you look at the Muslim faith, you've got Shias and Sunnis. They actually bomb each other in the Middle East. They kill each other. So it's not just killing Western people. A lot of them are killing each other. I mean, it's a mess. So that's why I think we should, in schools, we should be teaching people about the great religions of the world, and is there a core belief through them all, or where do they vary that makes a real difference? Why you should be either non-religious in total, or else you should pick a particular religion. I think it's right that we should discuss religion in schools. And so I think that's really what I'm kind of calling for. And then if I take another aside to all this, if you look at ordinary people have a great say these days. We go out in these big protest marches and everything. But you know, ordinary people are actually causing millions of deaths around the world. I mean, if you look at Ukraine, and if you remember, Ukraine was tied in with Russia. It was very much in the Russian sphere of influence. But a lot of people are wanting to go to the EU side of things, and the EU were encouraging them to try to become a member of the EU rather than stick with Russia. And there were huge protests when basically Ukraine decided they would actually stick with Russia. So the people got a big movement up. And what did that movement do? That movement lost them Ukraine. And if you look at what's happening today, I mean, Ukraine's a mess, but it was ordinary people that caused that. I mean, they could still have been anchored with Russia, as the president of the country had then said, because after all, they get virtually free oil and gas. I mean, they pay only a fraction of the price that they needed to pay. And even some of those payments weren't demanded by Russia. So they actually got a lot of economic benefit from Russia. Whereas if you're in the EU, you're going to have to pay real prices for those kind of commodities. But people didn't seem to see that or realise that. They just went out and protested. But they caused all this hassle. So Crimea is now lost to Ukraine, and there's still battles going on in northern Ukraine today between the Russian part and the rest of the parts of Ukraine. These so-called ordinary people caused that. And then if you look at the Arab uprisings that were going on, same thing. ordinary people caused a lot of the damage in these countries. I mean, if you look at Iraq, Hussein, and if you look at Gaddafi in Libya, both of those dictators, well, we got rid of the dictators, and in the process, hundreds of thousands of people have died as a result. Whereas Iraq used to be quite peaceful in many ways. I mean, there was free health, free education. People could walk the streets in safety in Iraq in the old days. But now it's a disaster area. And frankly, Hussein was quite tolerant of other religions as well. Same in Libya. Now that we got rid of him, I mean, Libya is just a disaster area. And then if you look at Yemen, Yemen is probably the worst country of the world right now. I mean, almost everyone's starving there. There's no medical health there anymore. Disaster. But we don't talk about that. But there are hundreds of thousands of people dying there. And so, I mean, the same as in Africa. There's a lot of African countries where civil wars are going on, people are dying and starving and everything, because two extremists think that they are right and everyone else is wrong. So there's no tolerance anywhere, there's no give and take anymore. And that's what our education system should be doing. It should be explaining things so that we are more tolerant. And kids should be taught good manners at school. And I mean, Scotland's got a huge obesity problem. So it would make sense to teach them show them how to basically cook a decent healthy meal for a low cost, and educate them a bit about nutrition, and that can carry through because they might persuade their parents to try something different, or they could even cook a meal for their parents if they know how to do that. And maybe the parents will say, hey, actually that was pretty damn good, I'm quite full now. Yeah, that was a good meal, well done, son or daughter or whatever. So I mean, I think all this terrorism in the world is down to getting a much better educated population. And we've got to start at schools with the kids. And remember, young kids, before they even get to kindergarten, like up to 4 or 5 years of age, these are now proving to be the most important years of a kid's life. And this was a 40-year study in New Zealand that came up with this, but other studies in America are proving the point as well. That these early years are so critical to the future of that kid's development that's where we've got to focus so much more effort. And unfortunately, that's with the kid, that's with the parents. But what are we doing to train the parents themselves? Maybe we should be getting parents to go to a night school for some parenting lessons. I don't know, maybe that's not possible, but maybe we should even consider it. Or maybe the parents should be involved more in the curriculum at school. And so we should be asking parents to come to maybe have a day at school to see how their kids could go into the same class as the kids are learning it and experience it for themselves. So, the other thing is, if you look at history, history is pretty appalling because for centuries we've killed each other over all kinds of reasons. But it kind of shows you that we keep repeating the same mistakes century by century by century. We don't seem to learn anything. But if we're not taught about history, we don't know that we're making the same mistake as they made 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. I mean, that's the beauty of history, the broad base of history. It's not dates. It's about what happened. And so, as I say, I think if we're going to tackle terrorism, it can't be tackled overnight, that's clear. But I think we need to look much more closely at our education system, make sure we've got plenty of teachers that are really well trained, and then look at the subjects that we're training people on. There has to be a part of school where we're teaching about the religions of the world and basically good nutrition and how to handle social media. And if these things are not being taught in class, they should be taught in class. And I say we need to teach kids just good manners. because there's an awful lot going on these days where people seem to just trash the individual rather than try and trash the facts. And they don't seem to know how to get to facts. They just accept whatever the politician tells them. Oh yeah, this and that must be right. But why must they be right? Well, why can't you check figures yourselves? There are figures available. Maybe you're going to do a bit of work, but maybe as part of the education system, they can show you how to get to these figures so you can double check things yourself. So, as I say, I think the future, education is core, but we need much better education. And so that's my kind of hang up on the terrorism attacks. I think education could be the root of getting rid of these extremists once and for all. So that's my point of view. Obviously I'd love to get any thoughts from you about whether it's right, wrong, or what you think we could do. Because I think a good discussion and a well-mannered discussion is what we really need. And I say I'm willing to be swayed. I have been swayed in the past by good arguments. But if someone wants to trash me, that'll do absolutely nothing to change my mind. It'll just make me even more convinced that I'm right. So, reasoned discussions, fine. So there you go. Education, I think, is key to resolving these horrible wars around the world and all this terrorism. But as I say, love to hear what you think. Thanks for listening.